This is me, and that's that guy. Ishwar, it is such an extreme pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
We're grateful that you made it.
People don't know the backstory, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. But we're just happy that you made it. So, first thing I'd like to ask you all to do, if you have not added this session to your schedule, please do so, because we are going to kick off with a poll and we're going to end with a poll. So, heavy engagement at 10:20 in the morning. So yeah, the first thing that we want to do is just get a good understanding of what you all are using to store your research data sets. So we know that some of you may have a dedicated data repository, hint, hint, wink, wink, Brittany, hi, see you in the front row. Some of you may be using your IR or some other form of repository. Some of you may not yet know what to do with your data sets. You've got data sets dangling like participles. So let us know. We're very, very curious. Okay. Looks like a lot of folks here are storing in your IR or other. It's a large majority. Okay. Great. Well, this is, and we've got, okay, 21% still weighing options. Okay, excellent. So now we kind of have a little bit of a better understanding of what's going on in the field. So we're going to start, just to kind of give an overview of the session, we're going to start with some context and some definitions and laying some groundwork or some framework so that everybody's on the same page. And then we're going to move into some whys and hows of data requirements. Ishwar, can you start us off with just a basic understanding of the timeline around data requirements and funder compliance?
Sure. So what I should probably start and back up is, in all my excitement to share about my fun fact, I forgot to tell you what I was doing for my job. I'm a program director at the National Institutes of Health, one of the funders of health research. And my focus, and I sit in what is called the Office of Data Science Strategy, which is in the NIH Office of Director. And what our office focuses on is in implementing the strategic plan for data science, which is leveraging data coming out from all of our research programs and projects to kind of either improve their storage preservation, to improve the analytics and its reuse, and overall increase the awareness and education in people to incorporate data science in their day-to-day research. So that's essentially kind of the strategic plan and what we're focusing on. And so as part of this, we launched the new data management and sharing policy back in 2023, and we had a huge build-up towards it, and many of you in institutions might know, but that is, no one can escape that. And so that was kind of the beginning of it, and then there's the public access policy that was also kind of is underway right now with the most recent one where data needs to be released immediately with the publications and there's no embargo. All that said, I'm not a policy person and I focus more on best practices. And so as part of our office, we've kind of been looking at stepping back and implementing program initiatives to incentivize people to better manage, share, and reuse the data. So that's essentially kind of what we're looking to do. In essence, forget about compliance, forget about policy and all of that. Is the data more useful and is it usable? That's kind of where we're going with. And so that's what kind of led to the Generalist repositories ecosystem initiative back in 2022, right, when we started launched the program. But of course, we learned a lot of lessons from a pilot program we had conducted early on. And two motivating factors over here is one, a lot of data that we were generating didn't quite have a home in a dedicated repository. So what's the best way to capture that? And what's the best way to lower the barrier for researchers to do this as part of their research data management lifecycle? So that's kind of what motivated us. And second, as part of this effort, bringing in the expert repositories, generalist repositories in particular, to capture any type of data in any format with a lower barrier, but still making it useful and usable. We also wanted them to impart fair practices and knowledge associated with making data fair, and not doing this at the end of the research project, but early on in the research life cycle. So that's kind of what the motivation is with the project going into effect before the data management and sharing policy went in, so that people could write those in the most relevant manner in their data management plans. So.
And for those of you who don't live and breathe this acronym as we do on a daily basis, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so I'm product manager for Digital Commons Data, which is a dedicated data repository, and Mendeley Data, which is our free generalist repository. And you can see the red Mendeley Data logo right up here behind me. So it's been a pleasure. We also have our initial PI in the room, Randall Love, back there, who also supported us with GREI. And it's been really a pleasure to work with Ishwar, to be a part of this co-opetition working group. And I think that we have, last year I co-chaired as well in year 3. We've made really significant strides, and we're really beginning to see some serious parity. And that's allowing us to do some really interesting things to move towards said interoperability. So exciting stuff. Also, yes?
Could I add one more point on that?
Course,
So
yeah.
I think Tracy mentioned the word co-opetition, and it was something that came out of a workshop where we really wanted to bring in, it's not a choice about this or that for researchers, it's about how best can they leverage everything, so the a la carte out there, and how do they make use of one or more than one resource in their environment and setting. And so that's kind of where this concept of co-opetition came about, where we invited all of the generalist repositories to find ways to work together. And the reason it's a little beyond collaboration is they are collaborating, but yes, they're recognizing each of their unique value propositions and not stepping on that, but looking at things that are below the value line where everyone needs to do that, and how can they divide and conquer that. And that also touches on the aspect of sustainability, because then everybody doesn't have to redo the same thing. Plus, it's also breeds a lot of familiarity with the researchers. They've seen it in one place, it looks exactly the same way in the other place because it's used, so that lowers the barrier as well. So the concept of co-opetition is kind of, we wanted to try that and figure out how well it's working and kind of build on that. And I think it's worked beautifully amongst the 7 repositories who are in some ways competitors of each other at the end of the day for sharing data, but how they make it available in the right context with the right capabilities has been a success. And they're kind of writing that up as a concept that could be extended beyond just these 7 repositories.
One other thing I would like to mention about one of our accomplishments last year, you'll notice a couple of links down here at the bottom. The top link is a GitHub for GREI. So if you want to take down that link, please come and visit. We are constantly looking for feedback from the community. We make our roadmap completely transparent, open, and available, so you know what we're planning to work on. We ask for feedback on assets and resources that we are actively creating, generating in preparation to disseminate, and often doing multiple versions. So please, come join us on that GitHub, give community feedback. We really welcome it. A really critical partner for this initiative is DataCite. So one of the important aspects of a dedicated data repository is the use of DOIs, digital object identifiers, and making sure that every data set has its own unique persistent identifier. This allows data sets to be searchable, to be linkable, and make sure that, whether you're doing it properly and getting your data set out there first, or you published your article and now you need to link back to a data set. Either way, that is possible, that's feasible. And DataCite is doing a lot with us now as well in the way of metrics tracking. We'll talk a little bit more about DataCite in a moment.
We want to make data citations the norm, so not wait for publications.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. That's a much more diplomatic way to say that, Ishwar. He is the diplomat in the family. Okay, so we've talked about it a little bit through the poll, but I want to define the current 3 types of data repositories, just so we're really clear. So the first one is the institutional data repository, not to be confused with our classic institutional repository that we are here for, but rather similar to your institutional repository. This is a repository that allows you to showcase only your data sets and to manage them in that instance. The second is the domain-specific repository. And now if you have done your homework and you've read the NIH Data Management Sharing Plan, you know that this is the first go-to place. If a domain-specific repository exists, that's where you want your data set to go first. If an institutional repository is not required or a part of your institutional process. And then lastly, if there's no other place available, then the Generalist repository is recommended. And one of the outcomes of GREI is that we have created and continually update a comparison chart, and we've also created a flow chart so that researchers have an easier means of identifying which Generalist repository is a fit for them, whether it has to do with the amount of storage or the types of restrictions. There are many different reasons why someone might choose one Generalist repository over another, and those are laid out there.
And if you zoom out from this a little bit more, there's a larger solar system over here, in the sense that if you look at just publications, then you can just have small data sets that are tied just to PubMed Central. If you have something bit more, then you can look at the domain-specific repositories that are very project-specific and domain-specific. And if the data types don't quite have a home, exact home, dedicated home, then the Generalist repository serves well. And then at the other end of the spectrum, as the volume of data increases, none of these may serve very well, and you've got to really resort to what we call these cloud-based resources, or these so-called data lakes, and you have lots of fancy names for these days, but something that can manage some of the big data. So that's kind of the larger picture zooming out from this.
Okay, so you all, as we saw, a majority of you use an IR to store your data sets currently. So let's talk institutional repository as data repository. So there are really, in fact, I think it would be interesting for audience engagement. For those of you who currently store your data sets in an IR, what's the primary reason? Can I feel free to speak out? Do we have mic runners? We've got Jeremy up here, poor badgeless Jeremy from Hope College. You look like a Jeremy I know, so I remembered your name on site from seeing it.
So we do put some data sets, very small amounts, in our institute repository as the additional file that you can attach. So you scroll all the way down and there's a tiny little link that says additional files. The reason we don't have another data repository or something tied with our institute repository is at this time we can't afford it. So Digital Commons
honest guy
is we purchased that product as part of the library's budget. A conversation at our institution, so this is a small liberal arts college, about data repository might be above the library level, it might be more at the provost's office level and then working with the library, but there's just no money. In fact, like a year ago, I learned more about Digital Commons data. Oh, this is great, I think this would be wonderful. And then we got the quote and I said, okay, that's not gonna be happening, at least not right now. So that's the honest truth, is being able to afford a product.
Okay, budget. That's number one. All right.
So I'll vote also for budget. Um, We put ours in, we started with the IR. So one of the reasons was it was simply available. So when the demand for research data came about, where can I store my research data? I know you've got my articles, I've got open access articles here. So we started accommodating that faculty need. So that's kind of how it started with us. Now we do a little more. We actually don't put it in as a supplementary file. We actually create a separate entry. So we actually have a separate data collection in our repository. And if there's an article or articles that are utilizing that data, we simply cross-link them. And it's worked well for us so far. And if I could afford something better, but we're looking into that because there is now conversation on our campus about doing a research data management center, and the library will be involved in that conversation. So it may lead us to greater things at that point.
Thanks, Roger. Very back.
Our few sets are in the repository from a standpoint of our team pushed it, and we weren't receiving any requests from other offices for it, and not seeing a lot of communication about it. But the interesting part is this is mostly people who have data and want to share it, not because they're mandated to. And so we see it from different areas than where we typically think the grant mandates will come from. So we're there and we let people know, and they bring us interesting things.
Thank you. Yep.
So just similar to we don't subscribe to a specific data or institutional data repository. We just have a collection in our digital commons that's just data sets. A lot of our researchers do biomedical research at LSU's medical schools, so often data sets are can be like 1 or 2 files to dozens of additional files. So usually we encourage them to publish or to put their data in OSF or something like that, and then we just sort of host a link out to that those usually larger and complex data sets that can be kind of aggregated in those sort of open or generalist repositories. We've never really had a push from people to want to put their data in. It's just sort of I almost exclusively harvest records where you have almost very little self-submission from faculty and researchers. So I also harvest data sets. I go into those repositories and actually hunt them down and add them in. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
So we have some data sets in the Keep, and it's bait. Basically, in my case, I had a couple faculty who were like, well, I have a data set. And I'm like, yes, it can go in the Keep. And the reason for that was to then say, okay, I solved this problem for you now. I want to get your articles. Now I want to get your student work.
Popular question. I like the engagement. Thanks, guys.
Yes, for us, it is also partly budget, but also we have one data set in our IR, so it just doesn't, it's not a request we get often enough to justify that extra cost.
So we're similar to Roger. We have a data set collection in our IR. It's got about 3 dozen records right now. I went to double check really quick. What we typically do is if they are smaller data sets, we're like, yeah, we'll take them or we'll refer them elsewhere. We've also had a little bit of a hacky workaround for some of our larger ones. Our aerospace faculty in particular will kind of come to me and be like, I have this data set and it's 30 gigabytes. And I say, it will time out if I try to put it on the repository. So they keep it on their server and we create a metadata record that links to it for visibility.
Yeah, no, so I think what I'm hearing is I think there's obviously different strategies and approaches, and there's no right or wrong here, but the one theme that came out, at least that I think is important for all of you to reflect on, is how do you connect relevant objects with each other, regardless of where they are. And so I think that's kind of a really important aspect that we try to promote as well, is that it doesn't have to be in one place. And in fact, as part of the Generalist repositories program, the 7 repositories that are participating have a concerted effort on connecting relevant digital objects between amongst them as well as beyond, so that somebody who doesn't know about that project coming in, lands on one of it, can navigate to all the other relevant ones based on the connections that are provided over there. And that's kind of where the persistent identifiers play a good role.
And that brings us to really the crux of this session is why. Like, why does this matter? Why are we doing this? And it really comes down to the importance of what Ishwar pointed out at the very beginning. All of this effort is not for nothing. All of this effort is so that researchers can easily find research that may be relevant to them in order to further their own research, to where we have, research more of a multiplier effect, and more of a return on investment for all of the research that we're doing. So let's stop now and talk about the future of data sharing and reuse. And I do want to harken back to DataCite, and make sure that we're talking about that data citation corpus index.
So I think the great news is we have done some preliminary data gathering, and in fact, they have, I should say, together in looking at data sharing and its success. I think we have more and more people sharing data, so the graphs are all going up if you look at all the charts associated. But when we look more closely at the reuse, it's not as great for one reason or the other. Either it's still hard to find the data, everything that you need or the relevant ones you need, or there's some metadata missing, so you can't quite interpret and do the right or answer the right question. And so that's we're kind of steering our focus to really focusing on, what's the purpose of sharing the data if you can't quite effectively reuse it? So that's kind of where the motivation is right now, to see how do you make it, as I said, more useful and usable by somebody else other than yourself, who generated the data, because you always have secret information stashed away either in your memory or in somewhere in your files that others don't quite have access to. So how do you structure that? How do you put that into the what we call metadata, and so that others can use it? So that's kind of where we're kind of heading towards in terms of focusing, and that's also kind of a focus for the generalist repositories. In fact, any of our other repositories, we have 100 or so plus other domain-specific repositories that we kind of, in a targeted way, fund, and we're kind of getting all of them to think about these things.
Yeah, so that brings us to, that problem. Talking about products that need to speak to one another, right? We all, in this room, we can't do the math for you. We can lay out an equation, but you have to plug in the variables, because each of you are using, different, a plethora of different tools. That is, I think, the foundational problem.
Right. And I think so far people have been thinking about it at the final stages. Okay, I've finished everything, and now there's data sharing and there's a repository. We're kind of having people rethink that from the data value chain perspective, right from the beginning of creation to transformation of the data, to adding value and knowledge to the data, all the way to the impact that you can get. So for each of these stages, you're taking into account what you need to do, whether it's metadata and standards in the right format for the data, or making sure you have the right level of quality measures attributed to packaging and sharing that data. And then the best ways with working with the community to add that secondary and tertiary analytics and knowledge and value add to the data for it to be kind of realized. When people think about all of this in the research life cycle, then I think we'll be able to kind of tackle some of the silos that we have, and how do you kind of break that whilst retaining a distributed system, because it's impossible to put everything in one place and try to harmonize everything with everything else. So that's not going to happen. So the question is, how do you strike that right balance?
So last fall, we got all of the GREI folks together in Chicago, right? We were, yeah. Yeah, so we were here.
A few streets away, I guess.
Yeah, and we got to listen to a really interesting talk by our colleague Rory. Please remind me of his last name. Rory McNeil. Rory McNeil. And Rory gave a talk on something called vertical interoperability. How many of you are familiar with that term? Anyone? Great. Ishwar, you get to define it.
So the big challenge is since I mentioned the data value chain, you're not just working with one product or one solution. You have all these different workflows and all these different activities done by hundreds of different people, and everybody has a preferred tool, methodology, and approach. And so these don't come together, and so then you have to kind of munge and manipulate and what we call wrangle the data to such a point that you kind of feel strangled almost. So that's kind of how do you kind of disentangle that is the. And then after the fact, we try to harmonize all of this and say, okay, the interoperability is a big challenge. But then if you look at it right from the beginning, how do you kind of build this so-called interoperability in a vertical sense? So it's not like in the horizontal sense, you have data in different repositories. So you would go pull all of those together and say, okay, these are all relevant for my research. Now I need to harmonize these because they all come with different flavors and I've got to kind of synchronize them, and then I can ask my questions on that data. But the vertical interoperability is really looking at the tools in the workflow and how do you build connectivity that the output of one becomes the input of the other, and it goes on that way, even within an organization, so that you're kind of having this overarching ecosystem in the flow of data. So it's really addressing the flow of data and the provenance associated with that. So trying to solve that problem even within an institution is a step towards the future, is the concept that was floated at that mini workshop last year, and we're trying to figure out how best to leverage connecting some of these systems. So it's not just connecting the digital objects in different places that may be relevant, but also connecting the systems so that you can actually manipulate on the data within those different systems as part of your workflow. So.
What I'm also hearing from this audience is that, and this is something we grapple with as well, there's something even before this step, right? Because this step implies that you have research data sets to wrangle. And it sounds like that there are a number of your institutions where maybe researchers are not so motivated to upload data sets in the first place. So incentivizing researchers, reducing administrative burden on researchers, I mean, these are also foundational problems, that probably precede the ones that we're discussing. So, I'd love to just give some thought to that. I mean, just giving some space for that, to acknowledge that problem, and that the desired outcome is that researchers are aware of the value of this to them and to the scientific community.
Two comments I could make quickly on that is, I think so far we've all been thinking about the utilization of the data by the humans alone, and particularly from a repository. So really kind of shifting the mindset to allow reuse of that data by machines as well would be kind of a shift to the future and kind of realize that impact. The other and so said another way, it's really machine readability of the data, so that when people are sharing data, please don't use PDFs. So I use other formats as well based on the type. Some things can be PDFs, yes, but not everything. So, or still worse, images of things which are not even
You've got a lot of PDF lovers in this room, Ishwar.
And the other quick thing that I would say is really follow some best practices and standards, and I think you wanted to touch on that, on the so-called desirable characteristics that we have for repositories.
Yeah, so we've identified the core problem, our desired outcome. The challenge for all of us is, and again, this is where there's just no clear, we can't give you 2 steps, 3 steps, 10 steps for each one of you, because the challenge is that you really will have to identify the gaps for your own institution based on where we start with researcher meets data set to all the way to, okay, here are the variety of products that we use, and here is how the metadata can speak to one another.